if you've heard of Valorant, you've heard of TenZ. He's a fan favorite. He's got like 2 million subscribers on YouTube. And he's also not just a content creator, he's also one of the most long-standing players that we have in the Valorant scene. He's been playing since the very beginning when these first tournaments were happening in 2020. And I would hypothesize that one of the reasons that he's such a long-standing player is because of his brand, not because of his performance. And that's what this video is going to tackle. You look at the brand, it's undeniable. I mean, this is the Sentinels YouTube channel, and almost all of their top-performing videos, when you sort by popular, either have TenZ in the thumbnail somehow, or have, you know, TenZ's comms, or the tournament where they won with TenZ. It's almost all TenZ focused. He's not terrible, of course, and I want to use this analogy, right, to talk about TenZ and his performance. If you had to pick between two runners, and they were both putting up the same times, and one of them had really good form, and one of them had really bad form, which one would you want to go for? Which one would you want to coach or sign or whatever? Or ideally, you want to pick the person with the worst form, because once you fix that, then they're going to be blasting the other guy out of the park in terms of the times that they're putting out. And that, I think, is the gameplay theory behind, since 2021, why so many teams have given TenZ a shot on top rosters, because there's so much raw potential there that has never been actualized. But unfortunately, in the last 3 years, I think he's improved slower than the field. So that bet simply hasn't worked. And because he's very popular, he either gets overrated by his fans, or not just, underrated, I would say, by the contrarians who just like to dislike popular people. And there's very little specific analysis that's actually available in the scene about whether or not he's any good. So I wanted to get really specific here today and talk about what TenZ could be doing a lot better, where he's at the moment, and how he could become the very best. So I went down and I analyzed all of his maps. I'll bring them up. I analyzed all of his maps from this period here where he returned back from the break that he took in the Americas circuit. So he's playing Jett, Neon, Yoru, and KO to figure out what he could truly improve on and become worthy of the spot that he currently holds. So let me walk you through the highs and the lows from TenZ and how the people's GOAT could become the actual GOAT. So let's start off first with the stuff that TenZ is already world class at. And it's a much smaller list, so that's why I want to start there. First of all, aim. Obviously. I mean, take a look at what this guy is capable of with his aim. It's unbelievable. I mean, what is that? What is that flick? Take a look at another one here of him with the Sheriff. It's just disgusting when you get him going. And one of the other things I think he's excellent at is bind. I know that seems really weird, but playing Duelist on bind, he seems very good at that. Here's a couple of clips from his recent performance playing Yoru on this map when he played against 100 Thieves. And his job here is to control the showers push. There he is. You're watching from Cryo's POV. Cryo's about to get deleted. TenZ deals with that very nicely. Not only that, when TenZ then tries to take a bit of aggressive showers control, predicts the fact that Cryo is going to try and break the clone, takes him out again. TenZ has a really good feel for what he wants to do on bind. Here's another example once more. Now, I want to point your attention towards TenZ here, who's going to be playing over on this area. I'll pull it up on the minimap for you. So we're taking a look here at what he's up to in general, right? So first of all, he's going to be pushing down B long. And he gets this early pick, looking good. And then he also goes for the showers crunch immediately afterwards, right? So he's taken this pick down B long, goes through, and now he's going to be attacking these guys in the showers crunch. And the way that he deals with this is also just absolutely beautiful. Dodges the showstopper, jumps backwards, and then he's ready to farm Khalil. And it's fantastic. It looks really clean on bind. I'll show you another example here, again, on bind, where TenZ is taking this op line aggressively into these guys. So he's going to be able to find value with the operator here, which the value, admittedly, is just that he soaks up utility. But he deals with that, puts pressure early, and then look at how he positions himself. I'm going to show you this on the minimap here. Look at this interaction that's going to be happening. Okay, so TenZ has got a shorty inside where Dejazine is going to be dashing and takes him out. I mean, it's just absolutely monstrous. There it is. TenZ taking out Dejazine. Just an excellent punish of understanding how an opponent Jet is going to want the entry into the site. So that's really lovely. I want to take a look here. Again, another bind clip here playing against Crew. He's on the flank. Look, he's taken this kind of position. If I show you on the minimap again, he's coming up against a trip though over here. So how's he going to deal with it? He's also got an operator in his hands. So what's he up to? He's going to go down really fast. He just instantly makes the decision to updraft over the top. You can see here, he used one of his updrafts. He gets into position, and the way that he plays off the rest of his teammates here is also sublime. He understands this map. He understands where his limits are, what he needs to be doing. In general, he is still doing a lot of great stuff on this map. The way that he plays around the rest of his team here is also lovely. Just kind of playing them in, looking to see if he could trade out Pancada there if that fight had gone the other way. So yeah, it's looking lovely. What's another thing that he's really good at? Actually, his flashes are looking pretty clean. His TenZ playing Yoru on bind again, but this one I think is much more to do with how he's actually playing off his flashes, or at least I've put it in that bucket. So we'll take a look at TenZ over towards Showers here. He's flashed his way in. You can see he's used one of his flashes, and that's actually split apart Derek and Bang. Derek's had to go in this direction, Bang's had to go in that direction, both trying to play anti-flash from this. And TenZ just separates them and relies on his really good aim to be able to pick apart both of these players. It's beautiful. And the flash to begin with allows him that opportunity to play off of that. It's really nice. But it's not just on bind. Here's another example, though, that we'll go for. He's picking a mid-round timing, which he doesn't usually go for, but about 120 on the clock, going for a flash re-clear over towards Fountain. Proactive, nice, and again, using his own flash and Sassy's flash at the same time to be able to catch Stella, and he just backs up. Lovely stuff. Later on in this exact same round, here's another flash that he goes for. You're watching from Marv's POV. He's attempting to punish Derek here, who's going for the plant, or rather, who has just planted. You see the flash come through? Beautiful thing from TenZ back here. Bounces it off triple, comes around exact timing as Derek gets caught, and Marv can peek. The flashes, generally speaking, are pretty lovely from TenZ. Unfortunately, there's more than just flashes in the game, so we're going to talk about the rest of that stuff too. But I want to show you how it extends over to KO, right? This is him holding a trap setup here. Here's TenZ up in tower. Zekken over in this direction. They've already had their contact, or rather, they're like jiggling for contact. Usually they'll play it with somebody facing over towards here or a cam setup, something like that. But this time, you know, they're just doing it off audio. Flash comes in over the top. These guys are able to swing and getting value again from one of TenZ's flashes. So looking quite nice. Here again, here's TenZ over here, setting up for a high flash on Pearl, which is going to pop really high up in the air and blind all of these guys for Pancada to come and swing around the side. So let's watch this play out. Flash popped. You just heard the audio cue there, although I do have it turned down a little bit, but I promise you, TenZ has just used a flash up in the air. All of these players are blinded, and Pancada's got easy pickings. Not only are these set plays, but this one also on the fly. Take a look at this one. This is a retake situation. They put a Cosmic Divide down so that the spike is on this side of what's going on. They want to flash through it to push these players that are playing post-plant as well, that are kind of stuck over towards Art. On the fly, TenZ after he's cleared out the rest of the site. Left click flashes. Perfect range. And Sassy's able to push through with it. So I want to point out here that the flashes are lovely, right? And getting him onto flash agents gives you value. If he's playing like a Jet or a Raze or something like that, he obviously doesn't have access to them. That's why I want to hammer home this point so heavily. But let's move on here a little bit too, because I think one of the other things, and the last thing that I'm going to mention that TenZ does extremely well, is that when he plays the KO, as he is on here, Fracture, and on Pearl, his trade timings are really nice. So let's take a look at some trade timings. So this is Nozwa fighting against Zekken. Instant trade there from TenZ, looking really clean. Here's another situation which is not necessarily as much a trade, but TenZ is holding in a position right now. We'll take a look at the minimap just to show you this crossfire setup a bit better, where these players coming in from Arcade, they have info that these guys are coming from Arcade. TenZ is not worried about B main, so he sets up in a position. He looks like he might be facing here, but he isn't. He's hiding behind this wall, and he's waiting for the contact from these generator players, and then he's going to swing and set up a nice crossfire. So we'll watch it play out again, because this is another great situation, right? As soon as the contact is made, TenZ just jiggles out just a little further, and you've got a nice crossfire setup. It's not exactly a trade, but I think it's very similar, in which he's not the player taking first contact, he's the one supporting and swinging off another person's contact, and he does that a lot better than he plays the duelist. So I want to just talk a little bit about some fundamental stuff. Now that we've talked about what TenZ does well, what are some holes? What are some weaknesses? I think the first one that you got to look at is his individual map pool. This isn't really something that many analysts talk about, because you tend to get way too far into the weeds. But at this point, I've watched enough TenZ footage that I feel qualified to talk about it. So his personal map pool is not that amazing, and it doesn't track particularly with Sentinels, right? Some of the maps where they win a lot, he does well. Some of the maps, it's not related or correlated. Some, it's the opposite. So I would say his best map at the moment is Fracture, a map where they're 1-on-1 on. But he's really good on KO. He's good trap ideas, good setups in general. Bind, definitely his best duelist map in my opinion, which they're 3-0 on since since kind of they let go of Def and he came back into the roster. Pearl, I would say that he's quite good on too. That's another map where he plays KO. Unfortunately, they're 0-2 on it, but they were fairly close losses. I suppose the one against 100 Thieves was fairly close, but he's pretty good there. There's a lot of optimization that he still needs to do on Pearl. I'll talk about some of that, though I can't get super detailed in this video. I'll try. And then it starts getting worse and worse. His Haven is okay as Jett, but it doesn't look very good. His split was repetitive and quite poor. Especially in terms of how he was, just very repetitive on defense side and very poor on the attack side. And then you get to Lotus, where he was playing the Neon, and despite the win there, I thought that was quite bad. Reading between the lines of this tweet from Drew too, where he says even TenZ, the only player not to play at Omen, was due to play him for a map at LCQ if that map appeared in the series. But reading between the lines there, I think that was probably referring to Lotus. And the kind of core reason for that being that it seems like he and Zekken would swap roles there, allowing Zekken to play the entry and TenZ playing Omen, because they pretty much played or banned every other map at LCQ, so we would have seen it unless it was Lotus. So who knows how good that would have been. It would have been nice to get an idea of how he would play on another supportive agent, because at the moment, like I said, agent pool is pretty weak. And then Ascent, actually. I didn't talk about Ascent, but my god, his Ascent Jett is dreadful. Dreadful. Especially compared to other Ascent Jetts where it's their playground. So let's talk about the agent pool a little bit. I said I'd mention it, but we'll hammer it home. So his agent pool is a puddle. It's a puddle. This is what he's played recently. I said that he's played Neon against Crew as well, but broadly speaking, what he's played is Jett, one map of Yoru against 100 Thieves, and then KO. That's not really a good duelist agent pool, and it's not a good flex agent pool either. KO's the only supportive agent he's played so far. Would have loved to see the guy play Omen just to see what it was like. Yoru, you can't really play it on any maps apart from Bind and Pearl if you want to go with like Ethan's thought process there. And his Jett is only good on Bind or maybe Haven. So you've really got nothing to work with here for TenZ across a map pool. And I just want to reiterate here again, right? I'll go full screen for this one. That I'm going to start talking about some really specific evidence of what improvements I think I'd like him to make. And I want to make the point here that I'm trying not to comment on IGLing and comms issues, which will have been a big issue for Sentinels this season. But some of these examples could be explained away in that kind of manner. But I've discarded a bunch of examples which were a bit more on the line, which could be explained more easily. So my point being that the sheer quantity of these kind of moments and the individual responsibility that in the end has to land on TenZ for some of what he's doing leads me to the conclusion that TenZ has a big part in why these examples that I'm showing you and these kind of things are going wrong for Sentinels and for him. I'm trying to use moments in the rest of this video that are poor decisions that then end in a bad outcome so that you can very clearly see cause and effect. There are, again, lots of moments that I've discarded where TenZ makes a bad play or a questionable decision and doesn't end up getting punished for it. Or some actually where it ends up working well for him because he has sometimes quite a high risk, high reward play style. But those aren't as effective as teaching examples, and they're also just not indicative of the majority of situations. So I just wanted to make the point there that I'm not analyzing based on the result, even though the examples I'm showing you will all have pretty much a negative result. I'm analyzing based on the thought process of him doing the decision, and I'm trying to select from those ideas the ones with the bad results to show to you because they're better as teaching examples. So with that being said, let's crack on, shall we? So the first thing I want to comment about is TenZ being too passive for a duelist player, right? And so with that in mind, let's take a look at these examples. And I apologize for the quality, but that's just what YouTube looks like with these VODs. So here's a retake. TenZ is coming in. He's going to be the third player in here. And this is just one of a million examples that you could pick from. But here you see Zekken gets a pick. They start to work their way forwards. And TenZ is the latest player to react to what's going on. He's positioned up on the high ground. He's taking a supportive angle rather than being close to the wall, ready to entry if anything happened. And he ends up being third in on this retake attempt. And basically, it's all being handled by Zekken and Sassy. And TenZ just slides in at the end for style points. Here's an even more egregious example of this, where basically TenZ is holding up all the rest of his team, trying to go for a retake. The harbor wall's gone down. He stuns, but the stun misses. The rest of the team is already starting to take space. They're like, TenZ, are you going to go? Are you going to go? Sassy just decides to walk forwards. The other two walk forwards. And if you spot what TenZ did there, he slid in basically after all the rest of his team had already taken the space. So it's a useless slide. He doesn't actually make any room for his team. And all it means is that he faces on this angle while he can't have his gun out. And he's the only player that ends up dying. It's just really bad, basic, not even neon, but like passivity from a duelist. You want your duelist there at the front, ready to make space. That's what their utility, their gameplay is designed around. So it's not just though when he goes for stuff like retakes or entries or stuff like that. I've got a whole entry segment. But it's also when he goes for rotates. So here's TenZ on a rotate, and we know that defense side neon, it can be very annoying to play, but also it's informed super heavily by how fast you can actually rotate and help out the rest of your team. So clearly Zekken is going to need some help sometime soon, so let's see how early he recognizes that he needs the help and what happens afterwards. So Zekken's already found a kill. He knows he's being pressured. Take a look at what's going on up here on the minimap. TenZ is running across, not particularly quickly, and now is thinking about the stairs push instead of trying to go to flood retake for quite a while. In the meantime, Zekken's under a huge amount of pressure. Sassy's trying to help out, and TenZ, by the time he arrives, it's game over. If he hadn't spent those 3 seconds wondering, being inquisitive over towards stairs and had just tried to path over here, he would have been in position to try and send a stun over to help, to try to wall out and get in and play off Sassy's flashes. And these tight timings, he just misses them all the time because he's a little passive. Let's take a look here as well at how he's playing on defense, because this was molding me to no end. This is one of the reasons why I was saying that his Ascent was just dreadful when he played Jett. And to be fair, this is the version, this is the one VOD on Ascent where I had to go back in time to when Def was on the roster instead of Marved. But I don't think that it's Def's fault that TenZ is playing like this, because TenZ should absolutely know better. So in this situation, look at his positioning. It's 1:39 on the clock. The attacking team has to go past this choke point and has to face on this choke point before TenZ is being useful at all. That's at least 15 seconds if Sassy and Def are going to be fighting A main, as it looks like they're positioned to do, and as they end up doing, and as they're throwing the one way to do, you have at least 15 seconds to see if you can get a pick over towards here, or maybe even see if you can pick this, and you will still be able to rotate up to A heaven in time before anything is being asked of you. So just way too passive in terms of his positioning on the defense, to the point where he just ends up being, he's just AFK. He's just literally AFK, watching Sassy and Def fight over an area that he has In fact, he wants them to lose that area of the map so that he can end up being useful with his operator. It's just nonsense gameplay. It doesn't make any sense. You have to be able to fight over early choke points in order to draw out utility. And if he's posted up towards A main, he's still going to be able to back off and pick towards Dice, for example. If he's posted towards Cat, he's going to be able to get back over towards Heaven, as he would be if he was playing towards mid as well, I think, and chose to exit out the other way. Definitely much better ways of playing this. And just to show you another example of what happens when he goes over and plays mid. So here's TenZ playing in mid, upping on this line, and before he even sees any contact whatsoever, I promise you that's the beginning of the round. This is the beginning of the round. Doesn't even wait to pick it or anything. He just backs off immediately. And now, because he's lost catwalk information, because he's allowed all of these players to start walking down the map, Sassy and Def's play into A main here, there's a massive hole. This is just such an enormous hole in what's going on, because Sassy and Def are trying to fight aggro over A main, assuming that TenZ is going to be on this line, or at least trying to contest this line, or if he backs off, filling this in. And instead, I mean, you can watch what happens. The minimap will tell you more than the actual game will. But he dodges the knife, and now this hole is just enormous. Absolutely enormous, and he doesn't even think to fill it. There's no call whatsoever from anybody to fill it. Zekken starts to rotate off the site as TenZ tries to pick up B main, but he doesn't have any utility to help him pick up B main either. You know, Zekken's still got drone here. Zekken's got recon. The turret isn't even facing down B main. They have no information. These players could still be taking B main aggressively because TenZ doesn't even realize they walked down Cat. It's just all far too passive. And if TenZ wants to be able to find more value as an operator or as a defensive jet in general, then he needs to be applying pressure and pushing limits instead of just accepting the fact that he's worse than the opposing team and he's going to get pushed back anyway, so why even bother absorbing the utility? It's a loser's mindset, and it's got him on the losing side at the moment. But playing on the defense is not usually what people bring up when they talk about TenZ. The thing that they tend to mention a lot is the fact that his attack side entrying is so poor. If there's any criticism of him at all, that's where the criticism comes from. And I agree. I mean, the stats show that. If you look at his attack entry win rate in the regular season, he had 26% win rate on the attack side, getting first kills. 26% win rate. That means that he's going on average like 1 and 3 on his, like, for every 4 attempts he has, he only wins 1 of them on the attack side. That's horrendous for an attacking entry player. So why is it going so wrong? Let's take a look at the next example. So the next example here is showing you a couple of ways in which it should be played. And I'm going to use TenZ as an example because he does sometimes have good ideas about how he wants to get into positions. So here, they're looking for the pick over towards mid. They dodge the drone, as you can see. This drone, Boombot, sorry, is going down here. TenZ swings in front of it. The swing is perfectly timed with the dog. He follows up on the utility instantly. QCK can't see him because of the Viper Rob as well. And TenZ gets the kill. Dashes forwards for some reason, which does seem a bit bizarre, but nevertheless, an excellent entry off the utility, which he doesn't normally do. Here's another example of it working well for TenZ. So in this situation, he's run into this defensive setup a couple of times where Ashedi is going to bounce his snakebite off the wall, and there's also nanoswarms in these kind of positions. So this area, very, very dangerous for TenZ. He knows that. So he's going to path instead over towards Waterfall with the Paranoia. So you watch him here. The pathing that he chooses, the stun is good. The dog goes the opposite way to him. He follows the Paranoia, and he's able to find this pick onto Davies very quickly. And then picks up Ashedi, who's focused on on C main, because that's where TenZ has previously been coming from. So these are the examples of good entry play. Unfortunately, they are really, really few and far between when it comes to TenZ. And instead, this is what we get a lot of. Committing into situations when he should just be pausing. So he tends to run his head into a brick wall, hoping that he's going to smash through with his superior skill. In this situation, he's just going for a standard B offense, but the big tool to worry about here is Nozwa's Showstopper. And I want to just show, this example is so good, I think, because there's a pull, right, as soon as the dog gets used, and you hear the audio of Nozwa popping the ultimate. He's mid-air right now. He's ulted. He's used his blast pack. He's off. Now, if you're TenZ, even though you've popped dash, You've got to stop here for a while, see if you can maybe bait out the showstopper, and then go for a second wave hit. This is very standard play. And you notice that everybody else, I mean, Zekken is a great example here to show you, because he's playing Duelist as well, right? This is a double Duelist composition. Zekken backs off. The rest of the team, all these very experienced players, also back off. And instead, TenZ dashes in. And TenZ immediately just gets massacred by Mizzino. The best case scenario here, he lives inside his Cloudburst for like, what, well, not even 5 seconds, a few seconds, and then maybe Zekken can bail him out with the showstopper. He's going for the hero play instead of just going for the more standard, conservative, let's back up, appreciate their utility, and go back in once we have that timing window to go for. Here's another example of him just overheating, I think, a little bit during the entry. So in this situation, it's a little difficult to spot, but there's a snake bite down on the floor, and he's dashed into his smoke. Now, he's got the opportunity here to try to stay alive just for a little bit inside the Cloudburst. Maybe he's worried about somebody spraying into the Cloudburst, so he goes for another Cloudburst, but he continues running at the same time. My dude just tries to go forwards at all times in situations where he should be going backwards, and yet when you want him to go forwards, he's way too passive. It's the paradox of TenZ. When he commits, he is all in. You can't stop him. And yet, when you want him to be a bit more aggro, as I was talking about earlier, he's generally way too passive as a duelist. But as soon as he hits the go button, he just doesn't know when to stop, and he has no appreciation for nuance in terms of his entry. Here he's vulnerable up as all hell, and he's got absolutely no chance of surviving if he peeks out of his Cloudburst like this. So he just gets spotted immediately and goes down. Maybe he's anticipating being spammed from this angle where you can't tell as much that he's in an opening between the Cloudburst, but either way, again, trying to just ram his head into a brick wall. And this doesn't just happen when he's on Jet. This also happens when he pops KO ult. So look at this. He's got KO ult out right now, right? He's in the middle of using the ult. He's just used it. And he's going to try and flash on a retake situation. So this is him retaking towards B. The plant isn't even really down right now, but they're going to go for some kind of flood defense kind of thing. So TenZ pop flashes through, and he's running through a Nanoswarm. He gets dropped down to 80 health, so he gets half of his health done with the Nanoswarm. And Zekken's just left here like, bro, I can't follow you. Zekken in no way can follow him through the Nanoswarm here. So TenZ is making useless space. And this happens so often when you watch TenZ play, is that because he can get through a situation with his dash or with his KO ult, he just doesn't think about whether or not his teammates can as well. Here's another example of him doing the exact same thing, right? Where he has his KO ult, he flashes through the wall. No one else is going through this wall. It's not that they can't in this situation. It's that he just lacks the awareness of his team not being with him. He could pause for a moment here. There's no significant time pressure. I mean, Marv does also horrendously beef the Cosmic Divide. There were many other problems on Sentinels all throughout this season. But, again, this is TenZ not having an awareness of the people behind him and whether or not they're ready or even can follow up on what he's doing. And I think that extends even further. You take a look at an example like this, which I think is very famous at this point because we ran the highlights multiple times. But this is round 2. This is an anti-eco where only classics, basically, for Leviathan compared to, you know, good rifles. Well, a smattering of rifles and, like, you know, SMGs and stuff over on the other side for Sentinels. Anyway, a massive weapon advantage. And here, my point being, in these next few examples, there's no thought about how he's going to help the rest of his team get into the site. So here, TenZ, Zekken, they're scaling off the dog, and normally what you would have in this situation is that you would actually try and dog way earlier, or at least pause for a moment in B heaven and get a flash into sight and drop one into hell and have one come around the side, you know, do something a little more slowly. But if you're planning to go quickly, at least you could Cloudburst over here towards stairs so that Sassy, the player with the spike, can come through and actually do anything. Instead, Zekken blast packs in, TenZ dashes all the way through as well. Look at this spacing problem that you've got now. An enormous spacing issue where your duelists are out here And your player with the spike and the next player along is here. That is such an enormous gap between these players. There is no way that the Duelist can help this level of pressure at all. Now, if TenZ had cloudbursted that off, Sassy's got a chance. If TenZ one-ways with a cloudburst, probably even better. Sassy might be able to get a couple of kills in this instance and still get out. As it is, he's got absolutely no hope. He gets overwhelmed, and they lose this anti-eco round in absolutely tragic fashion. Not only that, but TenZ kind of fumbles under the pressure and starts running knife out to recover the spike, as if he's ever going to be allowed to do that, and gets caught by Mizzino. Would have certainly been caught by the other players in B Heaven, though, anyway. For a more standard example, this is TenZ dashing into a smoke, but still failing to help his team get out into the site. So, friends and foes, I ask you, why do we dash into smokes? The idea being to pull Crosshair. So, at the moment, Klaus has his Crosshair trained on Hookah. That's going to be really difficult for anyone to drop down. So you have your Duelists get out and then pull the Crosshair, creating a double threat. Now the Duelist could swing you from the left side, and the player could drop out from Hookah, and suddenly Klaus would be left out in the open. Now, unfortunately, what ends up happening, though, is that with TenZ, as soon as he goes, there is no nuance in terms of how he execs. So he's only going to go deeper. He's never going to look behind and try and put pressure on Klaus and allow the rest of his team in. You look at what he does here. Klaus tucks to try and minimize angles, which is a good idea, but TenZ could still be swinging out of this in order to trade Zekken and get this kill on Klaus and allow the rest of his team out through Hookah. And instead, TenZ is just continuing forwards, looking deeper into the site, and it prompts Bala to ask the question, how come they can't get out? And it's because you expect your Duelist to understand things like that at the tier 1 level. So, let's also talk about entry pathing. So you can see TenZ here, and he's just looking up towards heaven, looking back towards site, looks back towards heaven, reloads, runs over towards hell. He is just actually running in circles around on the site. And the actual clearance from Zekken and Sassy is quite poor in this instance. Now, if you had proper pathing from your Duelist, they would dash into the smoke like this and potentially would either wrap towards elbow as the other two went towards site, and you've got a nice pinch going on anyone towards elbow, or TenZ would be the player going forwards, and then maybe you have a, like a nade towards the back of elbow or something like that creates pressure in that avenue, and you have two players swinging from the front around towards towards here. One of them being on a wide swing, one of them being on a short swing. And instead, you've just got your main Duelist player, TenZ, running around in circles on the site. It doesn't make any sense. So TenZ is looking to try an entry on split over towards B this time. So bonus points to TenZ, because he is actually holding towards stairs this time, making sure that nobody could push as the dog goes through onto the site. But then once TenZ decides to actually engage onto the site, he gives up his stairs control, which is fine. Ideally, you want to cloudburst that again, which he doesn't. And then what you want to do is, ideally, on split, you hold this angle just for a moment and see if you are contesting anybody, and then one person is going to come out rafters, one person is going to drop into hell. You're going to be able to clear all of this area really easily, and then you're going to be able to get into the backside. Instead, TenZ drops down, dashes forwards. I don't know why at all. The UI is a little broken in this instance as well. But you can hear him and see him dashes forwards, and then just starts running backwards and leaves this to Sassy. He literally dropped out of hell, dashed forwards so that he was about in this position, and he doesn't even think to continue going with Sassy. He just leaves Sassy behind. I don't know whether he's confused, remembers that he's supposed to be pathing with Zekken or what, but here Sassy almost dies, and Jake would have been able to live on site because TenZ was not in a position to be able to trade. I don't know. My dude is just pressing buttons out here. So I'm not exactly sure what he's going for there, but the pathing is a big problem. And when you combine all of these things together, it brings me to one of my central points of this video, which is that TenZ is a follower, not a leader. TenZ is not trying to find those initial moments in a round. TenZ is not trying to lead his team into situations and call for util. TenZ is instead looking to try and play off teammates, and looks uncomfortable when he's the first person into an area because he doesn't know exactly where to go himself. He plays a lot better when he's following other people, and that is not good as a Duelist. Here's an example of how the coordination between him and Sassy was just horrendous all season long. And Sassy also had an awful season, but this video isn't about him, is it? And maybe I'll make one about him afterwards. But here's one of the situations, right? You see actually just there from what I pulled up. Let me go back just a moment. So there's a shock dart being thrown, and Sassy's thinking about droning, right? So this is potentially Sassy going to drone up towards, and TenZ is going to face off the back of that. And instead, somebody makes the comm, who knows who, to just double swing instead. The phantom shots that you just heard there were from TenZ, who is on this angle spamming towards A lobby, seeing if he can take a fight. Sassy then swings out to try and help, exactly as TenZ runs away from the angle and just baits Sassy completely. And now TenZ, having baited Sassy successfully, now spams trying to see if he can find any value out of it, and walks forwards with his dash popped to see if he can do anything here, which he can't really. And they just trade Sassy for a long control, and TenZ now is in a spot where his opponent has a dog, has tons of ways to re-clear him, and he's already used his dash because he used it in panic in the middle of that moment. So yeah, all in all, not very good coordination with trying to, you know, make a play happen over there. One of the other problems too is that he's not calling for utility in these kind of spots, and you can tell because his timing is always behind what wants to happen. When you have duelists, one of your most important goals as a duelist is to call for the utility that you want in a situation. If you want a flash, you call the flash. If you want a drone, you call the drone, right? Unless it's something that's been pre-planned or something that you've just agreed as part of your default, it's really important that the duelist be a leader in some of these moments to call other people's utility that they want to play around, and also inform like where on the map they want to fight and how they want to affect the flow of the game. You know, do I want to op in this position or defense? What do I need in order to make that happen? You know, these are really, really important assets for a top level duelist to have, and I just don't see that when I watch these TenZ VODs. So let's take another look though at just him following utility, because if he's not going to, as a duelist, if you're not going to comm your own utility, at least you can follow other people's, right? And at least Zekken can say, hey buddy, I'm going to drone down mid, follow my drone. Or Def can say, hey, I'm going to flash into this area, follow my flash. And yet we still, admittedly only in week 3, got situations like this happening, where it's a really nice 5v3 situation on an anti-eco, no less, with TenZ actually having a nice jiggle peek in order to set up one of these kills. The drone goes down mid, and yet TenZ has the most passive position out of the players in mid. There are 4 players in mid right now. TenZ is the furthest back, not following the drone at all. There's a knife over here. They've already killed the player over towards Cat. This is an opportunity to scale, and he always seems behind the ball on what he wants to do. Drone goes down mid. TenZ, because he's the furthest back, now starts to pick up Catwalk instead. This flash doesn't have a duelist to follow up on it, so now Def has to go and do that. Makes Def look like an idiot as well. TenZ is trying to run up at this point, but he updrafts in, updraft dashes. It's just a mess. It's an absolutely horrible mess. And they end up losing this anti-eco round where they were up 5v3. Now, you can say to this, right? You could say, as a result of this play, well, Josh, also, Def could call for him there to just, you know, wait, right? You could... Def could say, all right, I'm going to flash you in and just wait for TenZ to catch up and then take the timing. And in this instance, yeah, they would have been fine off the back of that. But what I want to point out here is, if you are forced to wait for TenZ for 3 to 5 seconds every time you want to do something aggressive, you can never run fast plays. You can never do a fast mid take if the dude won't follow a drone and a flash up mid. And you certainly can't do it as an audible. You can't do that quickly off the fly, which you have to be able to do if you're a tier 1 team. So yes, in this specific instance, could it have been done differently? Absolutely. But the fact that it can't just be done easily anyway is indicative of a very large problem happening here. here's another issue, I think, with the way that TenZ likes to play, and because he's such a follower on Duelist, is that he ends up being put in positions where he's forced to say yes because he's being told what to do, and his teammates want to take a timing that he can't just keep saying no, right? If he isn't thinking ahead to what he wants to do, he's not going to be ready for them telling him what to do, and he's going to get put in horrible situations. So this, for example, there's 45 seconds on the clock. Sentinels want to try and take a Heaven control. TenZ has an operator, and he has knives, but he hasn't popped his knives. So take a look at what happens here. It's just disastrous, and it happens very quickly. It's a spam shot, and we'll probably be better off watching this on the minimap, to be honest. So TenZ pops his dash, and he's going to smoke, as you see it on the minimap there. So he smokes, and he's going to dash into his smoke with his op. He hasn't popped his knives. The knife sound that you're hearing is Taco Leah. TenZ has not popped his knives, and he's trying to entry into a Heaven with an operator, presumably because his team have told him that they want to take this timing to take a Heaven control. Of course this is going to go wrong. There's no world that it goes right. He gets spammed immediately in his cloudburst, but even if he hadn't been spammed, there's no way that's working. It just simply isn't. My dude has an op. How do you draw an op? Like that or something? There's the trigger. He has an op inside the cloudburst trying to entry. It just doesn't make any sense. And these situations are partly driven, I think, by the fact that he is not making his own decisions about when to go in and when to take the timings, because he's not enough of a leader from the Duelist position. I think one of the other instances in which this raises its head is when he's asked to try and generate a pick for his team. So here he gets inserted as the lurker. So what I mean by that is that what you can see is here, the rest of his team was going over towards B Heaven control, and now the rest of his team is going to leave, and they're going to leave TenZ there. This is something that EG does quite a lot with Demon 1, and what does Demon 1 do in these kind of situations? Well, instead of just walking back and giving up all of that space, Demon 1 would be looking for this fight towards King, or maybe even looking for this fight over here towards Stairs. Or at least if he wasn't looking for a fight, he would be looking to hold this area for as long as possible to get good information so that when he does eventually connect on the A push, once these guys are ready, he doesn't have to be worried about his back because he was just there and he knows that there's no way they have that timing. Instead, what you see happen is TenZ just kind of waddles around in mid for a while, looks down, and now has to go for a play like this because he doesn't know whether somebody's re-clearing over towards B Heaven, so he doesn't know whether his back is caught, and he decides to take this timing way before the rest of his team has made any level of distraction. Nozwa has no reason to be looking towards ramp right now because his team Sentinels have not made any distraction. TenZ is the first player in here as the lurker. This is about the worst way that you could generate a pick or generate advantage. Once you get into this spot, you have to be the backstab, and this just doesn't seem to be... There doesn't seem to be that level of awareness from TenZ. There are tons of lurk clips that he beefs horrendously that I could pull up here, but I'm not going to waste your time with them because the video is already going to be extremely long, I can tell. But here's another issue with TenZ, right? Another big problem with him is that he lacks proactivity on defensive rotates or retakes of map control. So re-clears of map control, we should say, perhaps. So in this instance, there's been a breach up towards A Heaven. So they've lost A Heaven control. Zekken's been forced down into vents and is not long for this world, frankly. But they still have these two players over towards A, right? So we're watching over towards Zekken, but let's pay attention to what TenZ is up to, because TenZ has been pushed away from A Heaven. He knows that there's some people over here, and he suspects that there's some people over here. This smoke as well makes it very difficult for him to hold this line, right? So he backs up for the moment.
A 1-for-1 there.
What I want to draw your attention to is this flash. It's 2 seconds away from coming online. It comes online right now. So now there is a tool for TenZ to be able to get back onto an aggressive line. If they stay in these positions, they just don't have any information around all of this area of the map. And it's tragic for Sentinel's defense. What TenZ needs to do right now is be proactive. Either pick up this line and tell Sassy to go and grab info in A heaven, or at least go over there. Or alternatively, he needs to have a flash where he can set back up on this line, or even better onto something like this kind of line, and re-clear into A heaven, so that Sassy doesn't have to be worried about A main and A heaven, right? So instead, there is a full 15 seconds here where Sassy still has a flash and TenZ is just passively watching back heaven. There needs to be a window here where TenZ decides to re-clear, and you see him walking forwards. You see him walking forwards a little bit, and there was a flash there into A heaven, but the flash isn't actually used for TenZ to set up on an aggressive line, and then he goes back over towards A, and in the end, they get stuck in a situation. Watch Sassy here. I mean, Sassy has to be worried about whether or not he's going to be able to fight A main, but he also can't swing A main because he's got to be worried about heaven, and TenZ is not really helping too much. They've got themselves in a situation where Sassy has to worry about the heaven player, TenZ has to just opt this, and then they need to call over a rotate to even watch towards the back. It's really uncomfortable stuff because he doesn't have the gumption to go and find those timings himself. Is it an ideas issue, a confidence issue with his comms? I'm not exactly sure. But I think a lack of ideas is definitely something that's relevant here, because a lot of the time they're just doing the same stuff over and over again. Not just with TenZ, but with the whole of Sentinels. So let's take a look at some of those ideas. So this is pretty much the defensive setup that they use every time. I mean, take a look at this on the minimap. This is what TenZ and Sassy are doing every round defending split. They're throwing a flash at the beginning. They do some kind of dog play out like this. They have TenZ set up on an op. Sometimes he'll try and set up on this kind of line. There's the dog. But there's no decision here to sometimes have TenZ upping this angle, or sometimes have TenZ upping this angle, or sometimes have TenZ walking down mid and upping this or upping this. You know, there's just no variety, and that's another thing that you need to be doing as duelists. You need to be calling different setups, and it's simply not good enough for a tier 1 team to not have setups that they can craft on the fly. It's not an excuse to say we didn't have enough time to craft other defensive setups. You don't need to craft defensive setups to just move your op around the map a little bit and fill the gap. That's simple stuff. It really is. Here's another example of, again, just TenZ doing the same stuff all the time. This isn't necessarily a strat so much as just every time he goes for a bind retake on B, he goes through the teleporter and tries to get out into sight with the rest of the team. It's kind of a funky idea. I don't mind it as something to occasionally mix in. But the problem becomes, what does TenZ do here if Hookah's under control? He just ends up distracting, and he's basically out of the retake and can't help the rest of his team that much. It's also extremely predictable that he does this. So, you know, just popping one player over here towards the boxes means that you've pretty much got TenZ on lock. It's very predictable, and he does the same thing every time, just pathing the exact same way. One of my other issues with TenZ, and I know that I've talked about them a lot, but we've got some more. One of my other big issues with TenZ is the fact that he makes decisions that rely on his individual skill way too often. And I've titled it as playing for the miracle, right? He's playing for a miracle to occur. He's not playing for the sensible percentage play to happen. So here's one example here where I feel like this is hoping for a miracle to occur. There's a flash. He walks through to see if there's anybody over towards vent. He pops his dash. He then, without even clearing anybody on the right-hand side of his screen, just decides to pop an updraft, kills Nozwa, and then instantly dashes through onto King. There are so many other ways of playing this situation. I like the fact that he walks through the wall instead of dashing through it into a smoke, which he regularly does. You don't generally want to be dashing into A heaven. You want to be clearing the left side first, slowly, with the flash or with a boom bot. Then, once he gets that first kill, okay, he can pause for a moment. There's still 2 stars available for Marth. He could be calling for a pull. He could be calling for a stun. There is other utility that he could be going for here. He could be calling for the second flash from Sassy if he wants to secure this properly. He could be waiting for Sassy. He could be getting up on this box while Sassy's on the low ground so that they can double swing this from high-low and give King zero chance of being able to win this situation. And instead, he goes for a miracle.
To the side. Good movement from King. Wow. Claiming two. Will he get the third?
Other examples where he's playing for a miracle happen with his defensive operator. Gets a really nice kill onto QCK. And as the rest of the team is pushing through Garage, he decides, with a Viper Wall in his face, to jump up onto Plat for another pick here, which is a wild play to go for. The rest of his team is not going to be able to help him in this spot, but he still has a dash and 2 cloudbursts to be able to escape from the site. Or if he wants to commit to the site, he can use a cloudburst to isolate an angle and then still try to kill the people as they're swinging through the Viper Wall. Instead, getting up onto this side gives him... I mean, think about this. The position that he was at, if he just holds the Viper Wall, he's got a decent chance of being able to get a pick. When he swings out further to the right, now he doesn't know if someone's going to swing out here or swing out here or swing out behind him by pathing around through logs. There's just so many situations. And sorry, I know I didn't illustrate that properly, but what I was saying was swinging out here, or going around logs in order to get behind him. There are so many situations in which... There are so many ways, in which he could have played the situation better. And instead, he goes for that shot, dashes back, cloudburst on himself, and he decides to go for another one now at this point. Which, I mean, at that point, you've already committed yourself, so you might as well see if you can just go down swinging, I suppose. But really just hoping for a miracle in that spot instead of making the percentage play. And here's another example, I think from the same game, actually, where he's got an operator defending B. There's a cascade in his face, and instead of respecting that utility and respecting the dog coming in, look at his decisioning. He decides to quickscope Mazine, which if he wasn't as skilled, he's getting 0 in this spot, and because he's super skilled, he gets 1 and immediately dies to Dejazine. Whereas instead, if he had backed off into, let's say he had decided to drop off the site, or let's say he decides to, first of all, kill the dog that's coming out so that he can't be pressured any further, drop back into this kind of position and op this side, or even drop back into back gong and op this angle. So then he's got, he can use the cover of gong, or he can use the cover of the pillar in the middle of sight to be able to isolate just one angle, and he still has a presence in the site for the rest of his team to flash and flood defend in, as Zekken would like to do. Instead, he just waits and decides to hit a ridiculous shot. I don't know how he thought he was going to frag his way out of this situation, but he's got the hero brain, and that is not going to work. And it's not just when he's opping either. He did this twice on the defense side, which Bala said on the cast, it must have worked in scrims, but basically what he's going to do here is dash into a lobby to try and kill them all. In this round with his ultimate, but previously on the pistol round, he decided to do it with a frenzy. So it's not really just ult dependent. And crucially, there's no information that there's multiple players on crew or over towards Mount. He doesn't know that there's multiple players towards B. And what that means is he's got to be cautious that there's like 3 to 4 players, possibly even all 5 players over here in A lobby. And instead, he's not cautious at all. He just plays for the hero play. The dog goes in. He's committed before the dog has even told him how many people are there. Just slides instantly. Can't quite get the perfect tracking onto Kesnit, who dashes away, and is immediately traded because he's contesting far too many people in that spot. Hero plays for no reason when it doesn't make sense. If you're going to make a play like that, then wait for information that there are, wait for Marv to say, hey, there's, they flashed and they're taking orb towards C. And then you can try and re-clear A lobby when you know that there's only going to be 1 or 2 people there. Or the same thing over towards B. You need info to go for a play like that. Otherwise, you are just feeding. My dude also has some positioning problems. And I think part of this is game sense. And part of this is, again, the same over-reliance on his aim. So we're going to talk about his positioning here. Now, take a look at the minimap and tell me if you can see who's in the wrong spot on this default.
You're just used to seeing that from bots.
What is my dude doing back here? Your team is going for an aggressive take of showers, and he's just spectating them. He's spectating them. And there's nobody looking towards Fountain. Someone's presumably told him to go back over there and look after Fountain now at this point in the round. But it's just, he looks like a spare piece. He looks absolute, blood is lost. Blood is lost. So just learning some basic positioning on defaults would be extremely useful for him. And this again is a top 3 map for him. And he still doesn't really know where to position himself when he's playing attack side Jett. And a reminder that his attack side is where he struggles the most in the early rounds, which is what you're going to be doing when you're defaulting. He's also, in terms of his positioning, again, that lack of awareness happens. Here's a situation which is just baffling. This is a perfect high-low setup. You have a ramp here. You have TenZ on the low ground. You have Pancada on the high ground. You get one low angle, one high angle. You're melting people that come through. And instead, TenZ decides to tuck himself in a spot where Pancada could not high-low set up with him if he tried. The correct, like, TenZ's angle here, if you follow this line along, it just goes into the wall. And there's no way of doing it. Like, even if Pancada tucks himself over as far to the right as he possibly can, the opponents are always going to see TenZ first. And for whatever reason, TenZ just wants to be on this angle. Klaus swings. TenZ loses the duel, which you could say is a 50-50, right? Maybe TenZ is a little bit favored in that situation, but okay. TenZ loses it, and Pancada can't trade. He can't trade. He can't see that player. Even if he was on the right, he couldn't see that player. So it's just a supreme lack of awareness from his positioning. And once more, relating this back to the hero play stuff, my dude plays in the open all the time. So he's looking over towards Showers. This is they don't have any information towards Showers. They don't know if there's anybody over there, and he hears the hit coming through short. So alarm bells should be ringing. They could also be going Showers. My dude just is so convinced that they're coming down short early that he just stays out in the open the entire time. And he gets clotheslined by DeJazine. Here's another situation where he's on the default. Now, this time, he is defaulting on this side of the map, looking towards B Long, right? Instead of just being a lost piece over towards Showers. But instead of playing next to the corner, he's just out in the open, AD circle strafing. And TenZ is not in a spot there where he can survive. And this wasn't just a one-off. This literal exact same thing happened later on in the same map. He didn't learn. The fake flash comes through. They're pushing down B Long. So this time there's also a flash that tells him there could be some kind of pressure happening here. He thinks about backing off towards the corner. Decides not to. And this is not a fair fight. I mean, you're going to be fighting multiple people here very often, because if they go for a push like that, it's probably not just going to be one person. So just please play the corner. The corner, please play the corner so that you can back off. Another thing that TenZ likes to do is play on top of weird high ground angles quite a lot. So this is a situation in which TenZ is just about to pop his dash. Zekken's already entried into B from hookah. So Zekken's gone like this into B, and he's used his Raze ult, and he knows that these guys have exited B Long. So Zekken has used his ult into B, and he knows that they're over towards B Long. TenZ uses his dash. See, the dash gets burnt there as he drops into sight, which isn't great dash management, but it's not the worst thing in the world. And maybe the comms are bad here. They don't realize that the wall is up. But TenZ decides he needs to use the dash because otherwise it's a waste, I guess. And so he decides to put himself into this spot. Now, it might not seem like a particularly bad spot because he does have great high ground advantage over towards these players, right? Unfortunately, he's also going to be visible from CT, but they're going to smoke that most of the time. So what's the issue? The issue is this absolutely commits him to this spot, and he doesn't like to move, because when he moves, he's going to fall, he's going to be inaccurate, whereas instead, if he was on the ground, he's much more mobile, he can actually go in clear areas, he can help his team, he can play a dynamic post plant, instead of just being in a static spot. So these box positions that TenZ plays a lot are really suboptimal, and that's one of the reasons you don't see other people play them. I mean, Zekken manages to clear this spot because he's on the ground and because he can choose different angles to play. And now TenZ is not really being useful. It's difficult to build a post plant that really works around what he's doing. So, we mentioned his dash optimization in the previous clip, so let's move on to talking about utility in general. So how good is TenZ at actually using his utility? I think, generally speaking, he's quite poor, for a tier 1 pro, that is. He was one of the people that invented dashing. He was the person, actually, that invented dashing into a smoke in order to entry. But his dash, ever since the jet change, his dash utilization is not great. Here's a prime example. He's opping towards a ramp.
He's got to be careful here. The Pancake
Now, we move to a different POV here, but take a look at this.
be able to hold mid.
As soon as that kill happens, he literally presses E instantly, as if it's old Jet. He's acting as if this is the old Jet dash, and you take the kill and immediately dash away to avoid being traded, which is not how this works anymore. What he's done is he's gotten the kill on Xeppaa, and now he's primed his dash, which is now going to be useless because it doesn't do anything for him. He just walked away from the angle anyway. If he was going to get traded, the dash wouldn't have helped him because it wouldn't have activated quick enough. So he's just playing as if it's old Jet in this situation, which he doesn't do all the time, but it's definitely a tendency that he has that he needs to work on in order to maximize his utility. So here's another situation where he wastes his dash. So this is... They're taking B long control. Take a look at the timing here on when he decides to use the dash. He pops it right now. I mean, he's miles away. He is miles away from any kind of entry situation. He's popping it, in essence, to try and engage on Octagon. They have a flash to get onto that angle anyway. It's not somewhere where you regularly need to use your dash. And the problem with this is that now that he's wasted his dash, it has really horrendous consequences later on in the round for his entry. So the rest of Sentinels is going to leave him here, like I said, as an insert. They're going to insert him. The rest of them are going to leave, and they're going to return back to him later in the round. So I will skip to later on in the round, and they return back to TenZ here. And the problem is, because TenZ doesn't have his dash...
Talked about. He's delaying for now. Davies, what a rat. Anyone dare try to funnel.
The rest of his team just can't get out through hookah. In this kind of situation, maybe they'd be better off with having Zekken try and, entry out through hookah. But if TenZ had his dash, think about what he'd be able to do here. He'd be able to dash into his smoke in this kind of situation, and again do the same thing where he can exit backwards out of his dash as somebody drops down, and say, Melza gets a kill, he can trade Melza, or say Klaus decides to push through the smoke, he can trade Klaus. And you can get yourself into these situations. That's one of the biggest reasons why dashing into your smoke is good. And instead, watch TenZ on the minimap. He just doesn't do anything other than hold the elbow smoke while his team gets massacred by Davies.
3v2, spikes.
And then he eventually manages to get through. It's a ridiculous kill.
That's a good one. He's going to look for another, and he gets it.
And to be fair, this is a very fun round.
6 HP. Time. Short.
But he does end up losing this one. And if he hadn't burnt the dash earlier on, this round would never have been anywhere near as close as it was. Here's another situation where Sentinels are going for a fake towards Catwalk, and then they're going to go for a B split, right? So that's the idea here. This is what Def has called cat fake B split. So they go for the cat fake.
How do you sell it? I mean, if the knife doesn't spot it, the paranoia is good though.
They go down mid, and I want to show you what he does here. So he pops the dash at this point, right here. So ideally, let me explain what you should ideally do in this situation. He wants to cloudburst down here so that both of them can cross into market. Then he wants to find a situation where he can use his dash either into the site to switch if he sees that it's clear and, he had another cloudburst to work with, which he doesn't happen to in this clip. Or you want to pop the dash as an entry tool so that as you walk out and start taking these fights, you can dash backwards or dash away, to a side, something like that, to allow yourself kind of a second life in this situation. Instead, what he does is he dashes into his smoke across here to avoid anyone who might be on this angle, And again, it's this lack of awareness of his teammate. How is Def now going to cross? You've just wasted your own Cloudburst and your own dash to cross an angle that you could have just Cloudbursted and helped you and Def cross. It's the exact wrong way to play the situation because he's only thinking about himself and he doesn't have a wider awareness of his teammates' goals as well. And I think this is a big game sense problem that TenZ needs to really work on throughout next season if he's going to carry on playing Duelist. Even if he doesn't, he still needs to work on this overall macro understanding of the game. So if we're talking about Cloudburst usage, let's talk about some other situations. This situation, he's got the perfect opportunity to go for, he's got 2 Cloudbursts available in this spot. He's got perfect opportunity to use 1, maybe even 2, and get himself in as a flood defender through CT and reinforce this B position. If these guys decide to leave and go through mid, Sassy's got the backstab. He's going to be able to clean this up. He's going to be able to get 1 drop back. These guys are going to be able to head into a 3v2 where they have player advantage and win the round based off that. So he doesn't have to worry too much about, like he's not actually got a great position right now. He's better off going and helping Zekken. And instead, what he goes for is the smoke fades on B main, King gets tagged, and TenZ walks through, like he doesn't Cloudburst himself through in order to get into a better position. And he doesn't spray the guy that got tagged by the drone. He just walks through and ends up going 1-for-1, which is about the worst of both worlds option that you could go for. He's on a retake here, right? And this is going to end up being a successful retake, but it just blew my mind. My dude has, again, 2 Cloudbursts to work with. He's been opping towards B main, which is how he's on such a fast flank on the retake over towards A. And just watch TenZ's point of view. He doesn't smoke the defuse. They're putting pressure on these players, and that's his POV there. He just goes, he taps, no Cloudburst used whatsoever. He doesn't Cloudburst A main. He doesn't Cloudburst the spike. He just runs over and taps and immediately dies to Nozwa. This is the most basic stuff. You Cloudburst the spike. And for some reason, this utility knowledge just goes out of his head completely when it comes to a match. Like I said, the Yoru did actually look quite good. I mean, here, he's going for an entry into B on bind. He's got the gate crash. He's using his clone here as well. He comes out of the gate crash at the same time as the clone. He's already used a flash for Zekken to get into Octagon. I mean, ideally there he wants to be peeking up top or swinging with a teammate. But overall, I mean, actually, the util usage to get into the sites is not too bad. And also ignore the fact that he has Spike in this clip and deposits it over towards backside B, which is not amazing either. Here, I mean, take a look at these flashes that he throws. So there's, you just saw it there. That's the Yoru flash that he's thrown to put pressure onto Derek. And he's throwing that supportively. Gate crash goes through again. There's another flash that blinds up Asuna. Another lovely one from TenZ. Oh, sorry. My apologies. That was not his flash. That was Sassy's. This is his flash that blinds Bang towards the back of site and allows TenZ to get towards the back of site and get the kill onto Bang when he's already gate crashing at the site to help Zekken. So overall, I was pretty happy with the Yoru utility. I think he had some good ideas with that. The Neon, on the other hand, that he played, I mean, was unbelievable. He played 12 rounds of defense. He used the wall 0 times. He used the wall 0 times on defense, which, I mean, that's like one of the biggest parts of her kit. And on the attack side, he only used it half of the time, less than half of the time, 46% of the time. And when he did, it often looked a little like this, where he uses it, isn't synced up with the flash, slides outside of his own wall anyway, and gets caught. And that was one of only 5 times, no, one of only 6 times that he used his wall on the attack side. With all of the things that TenZ needs to improve on, I think the question is there hope for him becoming a player that's worthy of the slot that he currently inhabits at the tier 1 level? And I think there is. I think there is actually hope for TenZ becoming a top level player, and that would involve a role change. So we've mentioned the KO. I've shown a couple of clips from the KO, but we haven't really dug into it properly. And I think that, yes, he could be a tier 1 capable support player, but he'd have to learn more agents. And that's why I had Ethan's page up here, just showing you the kind of agents that these top flex support players play. And I think the most important ones for TenZ to learn would be the Sky, because Sassy has proven to be really poor at it so far, and it just frees Sassy up to play Sova and Breach and other things that you would want to play with the Sky. And then I think the Breach is also pretty important for when you want to play Breach Sova compositions. Having TenZ play Breach would be really important. And I think as well, similarly to how Chronicle plays Viper, I think having TenZ learn Harbor, if there's any chance of having Harbor Viper metas continue into next year, would be really useful for them in terms of what it would open up for the rest of the team. And crucially as well, he would have to continue working on his KO and Jet, because his KO and Jet are not top tier 1 level either. But the KO does work better for him more naturally in terms of his positioning and his trading, and his utility is generally thought out a little better as well. Like, for example, this flash recon that he throws. So knife at the beginning of the round, which he always throws the same knife, but then he's in position to throw this flash at the same time as Sassy recons. Flash recon, the timing is not perfect, but it's good enough for Marth to be able to peek off it and get a kill onto Leaf, which is not half bad. There's another retake flash recon combo here. There's TenZ, you're watching him over there, and he's going to be throwing this high flash that we commented on earlier, and that's going to be going at the same time as the recon dart, which Sassy ends up being caught out a little bit, but again, comboing the flash, comboing the recon together is a nice idea. Here's another situation where Zekken wants to get Pop Flash back into to re-clear A main. TenZ sets up for a really nice flash. Zekken actually is the one that beefs the timing there. Nothing wrong with what TenZ did, but overall the idea is nice to go for that kind of flash play. The question here, I think that's very natural, is when TenZ is playing KO and they have more ideas about how they want to use the utility, is that coming from TenZ calling his own util? Is that coming from Zekken calling for TenZ's utility? And my answer is, it's unknowable unless you're in the team. And does it even matter? Because he's going to be playing, if he moves to a supportive role, he's going to be playing with Zekken anyway. So as long as the system functions, it doesn't necessarily matter who's doing the communications there. And hopefully both will end up calling ideas to just get more flowing as the match happens. So in terms of his KO then, I said earlier that it needs to be optimized. So what exactly needs to be optimized with his KO? So one of the things is his nade usage. So I'm hopping into Valorplant here for just a second, but I want to make this point. Overall, as KO, out of all of the maps that he's played, he uses the nade in only 35% of rounds. Just over a third of the rounds, he uses a nade. That's really, really low. He uses it 39% on defense, which is really low, and he uses it only 30% on the attack side as well. So he's basically not using this massive piece of utility. And so I want to go through some areas where you can use it, and this is on the defense side, right? You can use it over in A main here, just on a classic play. You can use it on the retake to clear out this area. You can use it on the retake to clear out this cubby, or the retake here to put pressure on any players that might be swinging in as you try and defuse the spike. Over on the B side of the map, when you're retaking, you know, if you're there early and you're able to deny the plant over towards Jenny, that's a great place to use it. Otherwise, if you path to the high ground, when you're retaking, you can throw a nice nade over here if they decided to do a B split on you this round. Or alternatively, if you're gonna, I mean, you can even throw this from the low ground as well, and you could argue it's better from the low ground too. And, well, you can't throw it as easily from the low ground, actually. What am I talking about? Yeah, from the high ground, throwing this one into the kind of back of halls is really nice if you're then going to try and retake like this, because it traps people in back halls and makes it much more difficult for them to be able to escape. So that's some ideas for what you could be doing on Pearl defense side. On Pearl attack side, I've drawn the arrows already. So, you know, if you want to walk through some of them, let's go for mid first, because I've only drawn the one, but there's a lineup that you can throw. Ethan throws it, where you tuck in this corner, throw the lineup. That's going to stop players from escaping. That's also going to stop players from contesting B-Link, and that's really helpful with your B-Link control. If you just pop flash through this door after you've thrown the molly, lovely little B-Link take. Over towards A, very standard nade. If you're execing into the A site would be throw on back default, but there's also a lineup. Again, I can't remember exactly who throws this, but it might be Ethan. It could be Zipan, actually, who throws a lineup from A main that lands over into dugout that's really good for clearing this kind of area. The most standard nade that I think is extremely useful that TenZ doesn't throw regularly is this one, which is you're setting up here to flash into back halls, and you're going to nade this as well, and your duelist is going to go and clear out back halls with your flash, and the nade stopping them from being able to escape. It's super important. If you get B for free, and you know that you have B for free, let's say they've used lockdown or something like that, throwing a nade here is also really valuable, and because it means that you can plant out in the open, because these guys are not going to be able to get onto this line to be able to spam you. So really, really useful piece of utility, and he only uses it about a third of the time. This is also TenZ with a nade to counter Rooney's lockdown. So Rooney's using lockdown. TenZ has a nade to be able to deal with it. And what I wanted to point out in this example is just that he doesn't have a lineup for it. The nade has not been saved specifically to deal with the lockdown because he doesn't have a lineup for it. It just misses completely. You can see it here. It just is nowhere near. So that is something that he could really learn as well. So if you're trying to use your nade more often, not using them when there's a lockdown, and learning some lineups to break common lockdown positions, really, really useful. This is another situation where I just want to point out the nade isn't even in his brain at all. Like, this is another situation where he's not using his nade very much. So look at this. So TenZ is going to find a kill here. He knows that Zellsis is just planted in this corner. The most obvious play to go for as a KO is just nade the corner, force him out into the open, and take the kill. And instead, TenZ just holds it for a while, and then he flashes. Has to turn away from his own flash, and ends up getting caught by Zellsis on the timing. So, yeah, tragic nade usage. But here's what I want to talk about with the flashes. So, I gave him a lot of credit for his flashes earlier on in the video. This is what I want to talk about in terms of him actually refining them. So this is round 16, and Zekken is wanting to go for the classic play that I talked about. So they've got a recon dart back here. Zekken wants to dash into backside. Ideally, you want to nade towards this back corner, and you know they've got a KO knife here as well, which is going to be sometimes useful. The KO knife is going to tell you whether or not you need to commit to back hauls, I suppose. But in this instance, it does tag somebody. So, yeah, they're gonna want to clear out back hauls. So where do these flashes go? Let's have a look. So remember, Zekken is pathing towards backside. That's the whole point of this strat. So this flash, it does nothing. It pops at the wall, and Zekken's dashing past the wall into his smoke anyway to go into halls. So that flash does literally nothing. It's well placed, but it has no purpose. And then he doesn't have the nade. He doesn't use the nade at all over there towards the angle where I said you would want to use it. And then this flash that he's just used here to get himself in is also late. I mean, he's used one flash to get past this wall for a player that didn't need it. And now Marv does need it, and he hasn't used it. And he just uses it for himself. And sure, it does actually catch Rooney, but at this point, you've killed Marv for no reason, and Zekken didn't have a flash to be able to play off as well. So this is what I'm saying. It's about optimization in terms of how he uses his flashes, right? The flashes are still like pretty fine, but they're fine for like, you know, mid or low tier 1. They're not fine for top tier 1. And he's on a team that's hunting for championships and Masters trophies. So it's not good enough. He needs to improve. The positioning is also really weird. So I want to bring up Sentinel's Pearl attack side default. I talked about TenZ being lost on the bind default earlier on, and this, he's not lost. He does have purpose here. You can see where TenZ is playing. TenZ is the KO in this map, and he's going to throw his knife over here pretty much every time. And this recon dart gets used if there's A pressure, if people are trying to fight through the KO knife. But as you can see, having both of your initiators on this side of the map is not optimal. I mean, there is so much more of the map to try to control. Marv is being asked to do everything here, and if there's any level of mid-aggression, it's only the turret in this kind of a spot as well. Normally, teams are going to run a 2-1-2, where they're going to move the I mean, if they're going to do some kind of default where they're ignoring mid control, right? And they're working both extremities at the same time, they'd have the KO over here, knife lineup over the pillar, try and cross, take some space over here, take some space over here. It's a little greedy, but you can do that kind of default instead of just going for what Sentinels was doing, which is 4-1ing all the time. And I think this isn't necessarily a critique of TenZ necessarily, but they're not using him very well because they just keep doubling up the initiators all the time. And in terms of his defensive positioning too, when he plays the KO, he's going to throw this knife that I talked about, right? So here's the knife that he throws at the beginning of every round on defense from on top of the hut. And then what he does most of the time is he immediately rotates over to B, just in case it's a fast B hit. And I don't know why he does this. I don't know why their default isn't just to have Pancada set up on B, which would be great against any fast B hit, and then TenZ doesn't have to rotate immediately. TenZ can pick up Art and fight over this area, or TenZ can pick up A main and push with the Jet and free up, Marv to go and play Art. But for whatever reason, TenZ decides to, every round pretty much, throw this knife and then get ready in case it's a fast B hit, which just leaves him out of the action. You just end up with TenZ being in spawn for, the first 40 seconds of most of the rounds. But in this situation, there's a very funny interaction. 100 Thieves do not expect TenZ to be playing in such an unusual spot because no KO plays like this. So watch what happens. Bang goes for an Omen ult into spawn, and TenZ is right there. And 100 Thieves are like, why the fuck is this guy in spawn as KO? What's he doing? We haven't done any B pressure. And it's just, again, illustrating how weird TenZ positioning is on KO, that he's the only person that does this. And it really lacks optimization. There's definitely a lot more stuff you can do if you stay closer to the action. But in this one instance, it paid off in such a bizarre manner. The other part is too, if you're going to rotate B instantly like this, let's say this was a fast B hit, what TenZ likes to do is throw a bunch of utility from about this position, whereas instead what's often going to be better is, let's say you're playing against a more standard team that's running the Viper or something, and they have this Viper wall. As the Viper wall is up, literally running into back halls to flood defend, and, even if you're contested a little bit here, throwing some kind of flash and then still trying to get into halls, or going up top, pop flashing out through the smoke, and then trying to get into halls or playing behind pillar. These are going to be really useful positions to play instead of just sending utility in, which is, again, something that TenZ hasn't particularly optimized for. I think, in summary, having watched a shit ton of TenZ VODs and the fact that this video is like an hour and a half long, I would say if TenZ wants to be on a team that has a chance of making it to Masters tournaments and winning and going deep in these kind of big tournaments at a top tier 1 level, if TenZ wants to be a top tier 1 player, I think he needs specific positional coaching. He needs someone to do what I've done, go through his VODs and then sit down and show him these moments and work on, like, what was going wrong here? What are you thinking in this situation? Positional coaching, improving him as a player, not just the team overall. He individually needs help and guidance. And I think also he needs a change of role. Nothing I watched with regards to his duelist play made me think that he's going to be a top tier duelist in the next year. It just doesn't seem likely unless he puts in an enormous amount of effort and that same coaching during this offseason. But I think he's much more naturally suited to the KO, to a supportive role. But that will also require him to pick up a bunch of other agents. Alternatively, if he doesn't have the coaching, doesn't have the role change, doesn't have the work in the offseason to broaden his agent pool, he's going to have to ride the bench if Orgs still want the brand value and also a championship contending roster. I hope that wasn't too long of a video. I hope you stayed with me through all of the examples that I was rattling through. Put it down in the comments if you have any examples that you want a little bit more detail around. I kind of was throwing out some concepts that I feel like you need to be aware of in order to understand some of those clips. But hopefully you guys followed most of what I was talking about without getting too bored over the course of an hour and a half talking about what TenZ can improve on in order to become a top player. If you did like the video, give me a sub, give me a like, that kind of thing, and give me a comment to let me know that you appreciated it. I'll do more VOD review content and try and keep it more to around the like 10 minutes to half an hour range. This was just, it ended up being a monster that I couldn't control. There was just so many different aspects of his play that needed to be addressed and needed some evidence in order to support the points that I will frequently talk about on Platchat, for example, when I talk about him being one of the issues with this team.